This looks playful at first. Bright colors, familiar faces, characters that once belonged to books, television, and childhood bedrooms. But the longer I look at this image, the stranger it feels. Nothing here is alive. Everything is frozen. The expressions never change. The eyes never move. The smiles stay permanent. And somehow, that makes the image feel less like childhood and more like memory itself. Because memory also stays still. These figures were probably important to someone once. A child may have carried one everywhere. Someone may have watched these characters every morning before school. Someone may have connected safety or happiness to these exact faces. But now, they stand on a table in daylight, surrounded by random objects, waiting for strangers to walk past them. That transformation feels important. Objects designed for imagination eventually become decoration, then collectibles, then forgotten things. The image quietly shows how time changes meaning. Children rarely see objects this way. To children, characters feel alive. A toy is not plastic. A drawing is not ink. Imagination fills empty things with emotion. Adults slowly lose that ability. Not all at once. Not through one decision. It disappears quietly. At some point, people stop speaking to imaginary characters. They stop assigning personalities to objects. They stop believing stories continue when the room is empty. Maybe this image feels uncomfortable because it reminds people of that loss. The figures are colorful, but the atmosphere is not joyful. The lighting feels sharp. The shadows feel heavy. The setting feels temporary, almost accidental. Even the man in the background seems disconnected from the scene. He is real. The statues are not. But somehow he feels less noticeable than they do. That reversal creates tension. Normally people dominate images. Here, the artificial faces take control instead. Their expressions are simple, almost emotionless. Yet they attract attention immediately because humans are trained to search for faces, especially familiar faces. Recognition creates emotional shortcuts. People trust what they remember, even if they cannot explain why. That is why nostalgia is powerful, not because the past was perfect, but because remembered things feel emotionally safer than uncertain things. This image understands that instinct. It places childhood symbols directly in front of the viewer and waits for recognition to happen automatically. And it probably does. Different viewers may recognize different things. Some may remember cartoons, others may remember books, others may only recognize the feeling itself, because nostalgia is often less specific than people think. Sometimes people do not miss a particular object. They miss the version of themselves that existed around it. That difference matters. A person may see an old character and suddenly remember a room, a smell, or a season that has been inactive in memory for years. The object becomes a doorway, not to history, to emotion. That is why old toys can feel strangely powerful, not because of money, not because of rarity, but because memory attaches itself to physical things. And once memory attaches itself to something, throwing it away becomes difficult. The image also says something about preservation. Humans preserve things constantly. Photos, books, clothing, voices, as if saving objects might slow down time itself. But preserved things still age. Plastic fades, paint cracks, paper yellows, meaning changes. Even the most beloved object eventually becomes evidence that time has passed. These figures feel trapped between two worlds, too old to belong naturally to childhood, too recognizable to become invisible. So they remain suspended, not fully alive, not fully forgotten. That feeling exists outside objects too. Some people continue carrying old versions of themselves long after life changes around them. A childhood fear, an old dream, an outdated identity. Humans preserve emotional artifacts just as carefully as physical ones, sometimes without realizing it. The image becomes quieter the longer I look at it. At first, it feels crowded, but after a while, the stillness becomes stronger than the colors. Nothing moves, nothing progresses, everything simply remains. And remaining is different from living. That may be the saddest thing in the image. Not abandonment, not age, but pause. The characters cannot continue their stories anymore. They can only represent stories that already happened. Maybe that is what nostalgia always is. A beautiful pause that cannot move forward. People revisit old songs, old movies, and old places because they want temporary access to an earlier emotional state. Not permanently, just briefly, enough to remember how they once felt. This image simply places familiar faces in front of the viewer and allows memory to do the rest.